Welcome back, everybody. Just got the last few people joining us from breakout rooms. I do hope you managed to get a cup of tea. I can see some people slurping, and I've got my tea on the go. Just waiting for the last few people to rejoin us, and then we're going to continue going back to our panel for more of a discussion. Do feel free to write any feedback, or comments or questions that you have in the chat. In this webinar, because there's over 100 of us, we can't unfortunately have people kind of posing questions live, as it were, but we would encourage you to use the chat function in Zoom. So feel free to write a comment, perhaps letting us know what you talked about in the breakout room, or questions or thoughts that you yourself have. I've seen some already have started to make comments. So Sharon says, if we take seriously what the church teaches through sermons, house groups, resources, and through our heritage, interesting in our natural way of life as Methodists. So the nice thing about chat is that we can all see what everyone is saying. Nivette is asking, how will this work in ecumenical LEP churches? So Nivette's part of our panel, so we'll be able to talk about that now. So Roger, both of our Tims, Nivette and Suzanne, we're going to continue our conversation now, and we're thinking about how Methodist way of life can lead to growth in worship, growth in service, evangelism, learning and caring. And I may just pop in from time to time just to prompt us with comments and questions that are coming up in the chat. So would anyone like to start exploring this question? How can the Methodist way of life lead us to grow in discipleship?
Well, shall I be brave and go
Please.
first? Personally, it's leading to a lot of growth in me. And one of the reasons is that I can't ignore the bits that I find challenging. So looking through a Methodist way of life card in particular, the areas that if I was sort of looking at them by myself, I may skip over because I think, oh, I'm not really sure, or I'm not very good at that. If you're talking to somebody else and working through it together, you can't avoid the bits that you feel you're not good at. And in that way, you challenge yourself, and perhaps you challenge each other, and perhaps you even challenge your church to help you grow in that area. So it's not allowing me to sort of sneak past the bits that I find difficult.
Thank you. Interesting. Yes. I guess we'll all naturally perhaps gravitate to one or two of the areas.
I think one of the things that it's very easy for people to fall into the habit of is almost relying on their previous Christian experience. So we think back to times when we've felt particularly close to God, or we've had a difficult situation that we're, in hindsight, we recognise God has carried us through. But the challenge of the Methodist way of life for me, and this is where I think it relates to growth, is that it makes me focus on those questions in the here and now, not in the past. What am I learning about God now? How am I expressing and sharing my faith with the world in which I live now, not 20 years ago?
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that the questions can sometimes lead people to a kind of honesty, which then opens the door for other possibilities of growth. So the Methodist Council was interesting. It's kind of, I spoke to them when they were able to meet face to face some months ago now, and when I finished presenting, a lot of people wanted to speak, and most of them wanted to say this is really helpful and so on and so forth. But a couple of people came forward and said, you know, I really find this helpful, but it makes me realize I don't pray every day. And somebody else said, I find prayer really difficult. And, you know, actually, it was almost like a confessional at the Methodist Council, really. So then people began to share what they had found helpful at times when they found prayer very difficult. Now, I kind of think that to have that kind of honesty in a place can sort of help other people to help you. And you know, first of all, you feel, well, I'm not on my own, I'm not the only person who's experienced this, but also you might find resources, and it then kind of can be a springboard into, I need to find some new patterns of prayer, I need to look at what prayer is about and find out from others how they pray. And you know, that's not a common conversation in lots of churches. People don't tell each other how they pray. But actually, if we did, we'd be much richer, I think, and that can be a real kind of stepping stone to growth.
I think the other thing is kind of around this question of burnout, isn't it? And I think in Methodism we've perhaps not always had a great track record for just pushing and pushing and pushing until our best people become our most exhausted people. And I think the balance of the way of life, that's certainly how we've used it in an all we can context, and we don't use the Methodist way of life quite in that structure, but asking those same questions around discipleship and how you're growing, certainly within my little team that's all focused on all we can's relationship to churches. Actually, we've worked really hard to make sure our action continues to be pouring out of a growing discipleship, and therefore kind of growth, internal growth builds external growth, and that's a kind of helpful cycle, I think.
I think one of the challenges for me has been is about putting some of the questions into practice. It doesn't mean having to take on a new project, but just the way that you interact with people around you, just an openness and trusting yourself in relationships with other people, and seeing God at work as you think, how am I offering hospitality, or how am I being generous with my time, with not just with church folk, but with anybody that I meet. So, and I think the questions enable you to grow, because you are taking those questions seriously and trying to put them into practice.
We're starting to get some feedback in the chat, so thank you very much, folks, for using that. So Group 17 had a really open and honest conversation about evangelism, so they're already finding the Methodist way of life helpful just in discussing it. So thanks for letting us know that. We've had a number of questions come through, very, very practical question. Christine asks, is Methodist way of life widespread in the church yet, because she'd not heard of it before now. Am I right in thinking, Roger, that we were due to launch kind of now is it, although it's been piloted in Yorkshire West?
Yeah. So I mean, the pilot in Yorkshire West was almost a mistake, really, but it was a very rich mistake. You know, we learned a lot from it. But the plan was to launch at the conference. The incoming president and vice president wanted to major on that at this conference and to draw people's attention to it, and for us then to make it available, the card available for every Methodist in the autumn. And there's a number of booklets and other things to go with it to help people engage. That's all been changed, you know, because the conference will meet virtually, so it won't happen in the same way. The material will be produced over the summer. The reason we've put the commitment card and question online is so that people who are in this COVID-19 working out how to be Christian, that it might be a resource they could use, but there will be more resources coming online to help people engage with it. One of the things we hope for is that come January of 2021, when we come to the covenant service, and that's the time when many people will receive their membership tickets, some in September but some in January, that everybody, all Methodists and anybody who want to be part of that, could have this at that point, so that at the point we make our covenant and step into the new year, it helps us do that. So it will become more widespread. We're kind of, in a sense, what my colleague calls in a soft launch at the moment, you know, that is available, but we've not put lots of other things alongside it just yet. Can I just, whilst I'm talking, Emma, just pick up the question about LEPs?
Please, yeah.
Yeah. So this did come up in Yorkshire West when we produced it. There were several quite strong LEPs in Yorkshire West, and they came to us and said, we really like this. It's really helpful, but you know, we're Anglican and Methodist, or Methodist and United Reform. You know, do we really want to call it a Methodist way of life? So our approach to that was to say, look, if you find it helpful, why don't you call it by your church's name? Why don't you call it the Christ Church way of life, or the Trinity way of life, or the Oakwood way of life? Because if everybody wants to benefit from it and wants to engage with it, it is coming from a Methodist place. It comes out of our history and our tradition, but it can be used by anyone. So some sensitivity in ecumenical relations. This is something the Methodists are offering, but if we wanted to use it together, we could use a different name.
That's brilliant, thank you, because I was sitting here thinking I'd love to use it in my home group, and I'm a member of a Baptist church, I'm a Baptist minister. Thank you for your permission, Roger, to just call it a Lee Road Baptist Church way of life, for example.
Absolutely.
I can check that with the deacons, so if you're watching, ministers, apologies. A couple of other questions have come up. It's a really interesting thread around, shouldn't we just do what we're good at? Can we be expected to do everything on the list: worship, learning, caring, service, evangelism? And then others have said, well, it's like having a balanced diet, which is an interesting analogy. Sharon was saying some aspects inform the other. So, for example, prayer might inform justice. We might feel that we're someone who's more of an activist, but perhaps the other elements inform our activism. What would the panel have to say about that? Is it too much to do? Shouldn't we just focus on one thing? Or is it that all of these aspects are needed for growth?
Well, I think just to jump in quickly, my favourite bit of the Methodist way of life is the little phrase that says, as far as we are able. That's a sort of license to accept that some of this is too much, and maybe today I can't do all these things.
Yeah, I wouldn't be expecting anybody to do the whole thing in one go. It's something, it's a way of life, so it's going to be used throughout your ministry or your journey going forward. So I'd see individuals and churches looking at perhaps one area for a few months and then moving on to another area subsequent months or years, in a kind of rotation. But I really, because it's based on our calling as Methodists, we don't say, oh, we're not going to deal with service in our calling. It's part of what we do. It's part of our work and our purpose. So I'd see eventually that we would work through each area.
I think what you said earlier, Navette, about how the cards are introduced to people is perhaps important. About, you know, making sure when we share this way of thinking that it doesn't become like a tick list. You know, it doesn't become a kind of, well, I've done that one now, that's great. I know when I work with my friend through this, we both have very different gifts. We're actually quite different people in our in the life of our church community, in the life of our, you know, in our faith journeys. We're very different. So the conversations we have, different areas are our strengths. So what's brilliant for me is it might be an area that I would like to improve on, perhaps, and my friend has that expertise or that experience. That means she can share some things. And often, like we've said before, the very little things, and sometimes nothing practical changes. It's just my train of thought changes, or the way I think about things changes. It's not necessarily I suddenly decide, right, I'm up, you know, up and off and sorting something. So I think when it's used in relationship with other people, you get that balance better, perhaps without feeling you have to be the one who's doing it all, if that makes any sense.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
I think it's a really important and an interesting question, that relates to all sorts of things, including in leadership and the nature of our churches, and whether as districts or circuits or individual churches, we focus on putting resources into extending our strengths or minimizing our weaknesses. I think those are two different models, and I would lean towards extending our strengths. But I think in relation to the Methodist way of life, and our calling, the four different elements of it are all part of one whole. I mean, we've just had Trinity Sunday, haven't we? We're used to models of three and one, but all being part of the same thing. And I don't think a healthy church can exist that doesn't express some aspect of each of these different elements.
There's a comment here from Neil who says that in the breakout rooms they were talking about using the Methodist way of life with people who are new to faith or exploring Christianity. What do you, as people who've been using the Methodist way of life for a while, would you see this as something that's helpful to use with people who are new to faith?
Can I start this one, Emma? One of the really interesting things about it was very early on when we were first exploring this, somebody said, "Oh, this is great, that for all my life I've been wanting something when people say what a Methodist's about." And she said, "I could give them this, and this would tell them what we're about, in a very simple way." When I spoke with the fellowship groups, these are the groups who are from other parts of the world in origin, who maybe have a language base, kind of Nigerian or Chinese. When I spoke with that group, many of them said this is a real tool for evangelism, because we can say to people, this is who we are, this is what we're about, why don't you come and join us? And that was a big surprise to me. But it does seem to me that it's not an unimportant part of it. And for people who are wanting to explore what Christian faith is about, we've had really good resources like Alpha and lots of things that go with it, where people get together and they talk about the faith and they explore whether they want to sign up. Always I felt it would be quite good if in those inquirers courses we had ways of people to participate in the practices, going to help at the food bank, going to deliver things to needy people, participate in that, going on a rally to, like the rallies we've seen recently, kind of against the injustice of racism, doing those things and then saying, well, why do you think Christians do that? This is kind of the practices are as important as the beliefs, really.
Interesting, that came out in the chat as well. I think it was David Goodall who wrote referred to Elaine Heath's work around new monasticism, and that small groups are not just for sharing but for doing as well, and that's something which chimes in with what you're saying there, Roger.
Elaine, in one of her books, tells about a time when she was just starting out in ministry, and her mentor was helping her with that in terms of evangelism. And her mentor said to her that with new Christians, don't start with doctrine because you will kill them. Start with prayer. And then she gave this really interesting definition of prayer, which that it's about teaching people to gaze into the eyes of Jesus, who gazes back with inexhaustible love. And I think this Methodist way of life and the idea of the practices, spiritual practices, is a really useful tool for helping people to experience faith, rather than get too caught up with the minutiae of all the different doctrines and theologies that we hold or don't.
Thank you. I'm just captivated by that image of Jesus gazing back with inexhaustible love. I'm conscious that Tony Moody is waiting to be interviewed. Perhaps would anyone in the panel like to make any last comments before we move on? So Tony Moody is with us as well. And so Tony and Roger and I are just going to have a conversation about some of the practical resources that are coming out. We've already started to talk about the launch, which is going to happen a little bit differently from what was planned for reasons we're all familiar with. So Tony, how are you going to get Methodist Way of Life out there? What's the plan?
Yeah, thanks, Emma. So with Roger's used the term a soft launch, or we could also say it's a phasing in of Methodist Way of Life. And that's begun already with the setting up of the Methodist Way of Life page on the Methodist Church website. So the card, as Roger said, the commitment card is there with an introduction. Roger, I think there's one video up already and more will follow. Due later this month is the PDF of an A6 booklet, a brief guide to a Methodist Way of Life. And as other resources, which we'll speak about as we go on, come out, they'll be added to the web page. But there will also be, from September, I guess from late August, available to everybody in the Methodist Church, the hard copies of the commitment cards, as well as the brief guide, the A6 booklet, and those will be made available to churches with the membership ticket. So every member of the Methodist Church will receive, along with the membership ticket, the brief guide to Methodist Way of Life, and of course the card itself. More will follow though.
That's great. Apologies, Tony. I should have started by saying who you are. So Tony, tell us briefly who you are for those who don't know you. Yeah,
so I'm Tony Moody, and I'm actually a colleague of Emma, a member of the Evangelism and Growth team, with particular responsibility for discipleship and spirituality. And in that role, I'm supporting Roger and the group who are working on Methodist Way of Life. I try and do the organizational side of things, as well as participating in other ways.
Thank you. So I've just got up the Methodist Way of Life part of the website. So all I did was went onto the Methodist Church website and typed Methodist Way of Life in the search bar, and these graphics will be familiar from the video that Roger presented, and so I'm guessing that downloads will start to appear up there. Am I right, Tony?
Yeah, yes. Yeah.
Fantastic.
And just to add, it's not just the English version, but there are translations, some of which are already on the website, and I'm following up with others which are still in process. In the end, there should be, I think, over a dozen, maybe up to 16 different languages available.
That's great. So we can go on the Methodist Way of Life webpage and we can see the commitments there straight away, and there'll be more resources coming up as time goes on. The commitment card's very simple. Is that deliberate to have a very simple commitment card, or will it become more complex as time goes on?
I mean, I would say it's really important to retain the simplicity in order to maintain the practice. But I think somebody who's already commented on each one of those has got a depth to it, that can keep us busy with study and practice for the rest of our lives. Just think about prayer, for example. So and this would probably be mainly my responsibility, would want to see signposting of resources to help people develop further in each one of those 12 commitments. But I think, the phrase beauty of simplicity is really important when we apply it to the commitments of the Methodist Way of Life. Don't overcomplicate those, but realize there's a huge depth to each one of them.
Thank you very much. So we've got an idea of how Methodist Way of Life is being launched, and of course there's loads of great resources up there already. In terms of keeping the energy behind Methodist Way of Life in the coming months, what's planned for the future?
Well, Roger's written a booklet which will come out in A5 form. It will also go up on the website as PDF from as soon as it's available in August. That will not go to every person in the Methodist Church, because that involves a printing of about 300,000. But we'll be printing about 40,000 of those, and every circuit will get copies. Depending on the size of the circuit, I would imagine between 10 and 30 copies. But in addition to that, every local preacher and every worship leader will receive a copy of the booklet, Finding the Way. And Roger gives sort of some of the background, some more explanation, and exercises to be used in practicing the way of life. Also in the pipeline will be study guides to that booklet, to Finding the Way. Those, I think, will be available end of October, beginning of November. Small groups can use those in studying the way of life and doing some of the exercises together. And then also we have at the moment 12 different authors working on sermon materials for each of the commitments. So there will be a set of 12, I'm going to put it, I don't want to use the word series because it sounds like you're going to have 12 sermons all in a row, but we're producing sets of materials for each of the 12 topics. And those will be available from December. And I would link that to what Roger said about encouraging people around the covenant service. Our hope is that those sermons would be used perhaps over a period of a year. So there might be a sermon every month, but it would be entirely up to circuits and churches as to how they would be used. So we have a wide range of Methodists, all kinds, who are producing those dozen sermon outlines, rather along the lines of the material for Bible Month.
That's great. Sounds like you're going to have a very busy few months, Tony.
And I'm sure I've missed something out, and Roger will be able to fill in.
Oh.
Yes, Roger, anything to add?
Well, I think Tony's covered it. Those are the range of things that we're working on. I think the local preachers are working with us too, as are the children and youth department. So we're working on some materials that will work within their areas to relate to a Methodist way of life, and we're benefiting from their expertise.
Fantastic. Well, we're coming to the end of our webinar now. I've really enjoyed it. I was saying to Roger during the breakout time, I knew nothing about the Methodist way of life really an hour and a half ago, and I feel much better informed now, and I'm seriously thinking about how my home group could benefit from this approach. So thank you to everybody. Thank you to Roger, to Tony, to Suzanne, Novette, and both Tims. Thank you to David, who's helped with all of the unseen but complicated bits in the background, and to Alison Ball, who actually prepared a lot of the material for today along with Roger, and we do hope she feels better soon. Just to let you know that there'll be some more downloads going up on the website, so there will be a recording of this webinar in case you'd like to listen again, or if you know of people who weren't able to be present today. It usually takes a couple of days for the recording to be finalised and uploaded, so look out for it in a couple of days' time. The participant materials, if you haven't managed to download them yet, there's a link already up on the website, and that's methodist.org.uk/mission-beyond-lockdown, so where the list of webinars is. And in fact, I'm going to show that screen now so that I can just let you know about webinars coming up. Oh no, that's Roger, just let me know, can you see the lockdown tab now, or are you seeing the Methodist way of life?
We've got the lockdown, the webinar, we've got the webinars up now.
I'm still learning how to drive Zoom. I'm getting there, but I haven't quite got my advanced Zoom driving test yet. So hopefully you can see the list of upcoming webinars, the Methodist way of life, and there'll be a recording coming up soon. Friday the 19th of June, so next Friday, starting a new place for new people. Matt Finch, my colleague, is a pioneering church planting officer, will be leading us through that webinar. That's at 10 o'clock in the morning, so do be careful, the times do vary slightly between webinars. There's a webinar on digital discipleship on the 24th of June, and Fola Oyaleye from the London district and Ali Johnson, from Cliff are going to be joining me to explore digital discipleship, how people learn. So rather than looking at the specifics of Zoom and WhatsApp and particular technology, we're going to be thinking more broadly about how discipleship works. So there'll be real sort of meeting points with what we've been talking about this afternoon. So what now? The church comes out of lockdown. That's 2 o'clock on Friday, the 10th of July. We're not quite sure what stage we're going to be at by the 10th of July, but at that point we're going to be starting to think about reopening. And so I have a number of colleagues who've been preparing to offer some thoughts there. Slightly different is our conference fringe event. So although it's in our webinar series, it will be a little bit different. That's the 29th of June, so it's the Monday of conference. And we're very excited that Elaine Heath, who's been mentioned in today's webinar, Reverend Dr. Elaine Heath, Dr. Krish Kandaya, and our Methodist Youth President, Thelma Comey, will be joining my boss, Trey Hall, to talk on the subject, Everyone an Evangelist, Even You. So there's a link there to sign up for that webinar. We've got space for 500 people, so we're hoping to have a really good turnout there. Thanks everybody. Do please email me if there's anything extra you want me to send out or to upload, but I'm very grateful to everyone who's taken part this afternoon and hope to see you at future webinars. Goodbye.
Gracious God, thank you for your extraordinary love shown to us in Jesus. Help us to live each moment of each day in gratitude, loving those around us and witnessing to the ways of your kingdom. Refresh us continually in the power of the Holy Spirit to be people of the way. In Jesus, amen.